There are way too many problems on these two worksheets, and that'll make the video way too long, so I'm just going to do the odd numbers. However, at the end of this video, you'll see the rest of the answers to these problems, and feel free to pause the video to get the answers and make sure that you got them correct. But I will just do the odds with you. So solving absolute value equations, you first need to make sure that the absolute value portion of your expression is alone, meaning there's nothing around it. We're not multiplying it by anything or adding anything to it. In number one case, the absolute value portion of our expression on the left-hand side is alone. So that would mean that we would just have to go ahead and split it. So remember, when you're solving these type of equations, you'll just set 1 equal to the number on the right-hand side, and then 1 equal to the opposite of the number on the right-hand side. So it would be 3x equals 9 and 3x equals negative 9. All you'd have to do is divide by 3 here on both equations, and you get x equals 3 and x equals negative 3, and those would be your two answers to this absolute value equation. Alright, let's move on to number 3. Again, absolute value bars by themselves, so we could just immediately split it. We get b over 5 equals 1, and then we get b over 5 equals negative 1. b over 5, that means b divided by 5. So if we're doing inverse operations to solve this equation, that would mean that we'd have to multiply both sides by 5. And we'd do that on both equations. And if you do that, you'd get your 5's canceling out there. That would just give you b equals 5. And your 5's cancel out there. That would just give you b equals negative 5. So your answer would be b equals negative 5, comma 5. Alright, let's move on to number 5. Similar to number 3. So split it up, we'd get n over 3 equals 2. And n over 3 equals negative 2. Have to multiply again both sides, this time by 3. And if you do that on both equations, you get n equals 6 and n equals negative 6. So your solution set would be n equals negative 6, comma 6. Number 7. Again, absolute value bars by themselves on the left-hand side of the equation, so we could just immediately split it. So one of these would be negative 2r minus 1 equals 11, and the other one would be negative 2r minus 1 equals negative 11. And you would solve. So add 1 on both equations, both sides of both equations. And if you do that, you get negative 2r equals 12 on that side, and negative 2r equals negative 10 on this side. Then you would divide both equations, both sides of both equations by negative 2. And if you do that, you'd get r equals negative 6 and r equals positive 5. So your solution set would be r equals negative 6 and positive 5. Alright, number 9, again, absolute value bar by themselves, so we could just go ahead and immediately split it. So we'd have negative 2n plus 6 equals 6, and negative 2n plus 6 equals negative 6, and then we solve this equation. Subtract 6 on both sides of the first equation, subtract 6 on both sides of the second equation, and you'd get negative 2n equals 0, and negative 2n equals negative 12. Alright, divide both sides by negative 2 on the first equation, divide both sides by negative 2 on the second equation, and you'd get n equals 0 and n equals positive 6. So your solution set would be n equals 0, 6. So remember, for time purposes, I'm only doing the odd numbers, but the answers to all of the problems would be shown at the end of this video, and you could just pause it to check your work. So this time, the absolute value expression is not by itself, okay? We have this plus 5 here. So when we're solving this type of problem, we need to get the absolute value portion of the expression by itself. And in order to do that, you would just use inverse operations. You would just subtract by 5 on both sides. And you get the absolute value of 5x equals 40. Now that the absolute value portion of the expression is alone, you could go ahead and split it. And you have 5x equals 40, and 5x equals negative 40. You divide by 5 on both sides in the first equation, divide by 5 on both sides of the second equation, and you get x equals 8 and x equals negative 8. That would be your solution set. X equals negative 8 and 8. Alright, next we have 5 minus 8 times negative 2n equals negative 75. So, we did a lot of these types of problems in class. You have to get rid of the 5 and the negative 8 first before you could split it. What would you get rid of first? Well, I mean, this is an equation, so you know you're always going to get rid of your addition or your subtraction first before you get rid of your multiplication. Right? Just like you would with any regular two-step equation. So what we'd get rid of first is this 5, and the opposite of positive 5 is a negative 5. That would be your inverse operation there. And that would cancel out. You'd be left with negative 8 times the absolute value of negative 2n equals negative 80. Now, that's multiplication, so to get rid of multiplication, we'd have to divide. Divide both sides by negative 8, and you get the absolute value of negative 2n equals positive 10. Now you go ahead and split it up. You get negative 2n equals positive 10, and negative 2n equals negative 10. Divide both sides of both equations by negative 2, and you would get your final answer, which would be n equals negative 5 and n equals positive 5.